Hey, this is Bree. I am doing my project over narrative therapy, and it's July the 15th, 2021, and this is for Nursing 7352. So in this presentation, you will learn the definition, historical perspective, and development of narrative therapy, the aim, assumptions, themes, major concepts, and techniques for narrative therapy, the therapist's role, assessment, presenting signs and symptoms, and DSM-5 diagnoses that commonly benefit with narrative therapy. You'll be able to apply a case study for narrative therapy, and you'll be able to identify treatment approaches, exercises, videos, certification, and resources for narrative therapy for practice. And I also made a study guide for the exam. If you just reach out to me, I can send it to you. So a quote that encompasses narrative therapy is, "The problem is the problem, and the person is not the problem." Narrative therapy is a theory that is founded on the idea that people have many interacting narratives that go into making up their sense of who they are, and that the issues they bring to therapy are not restricted to or located within the clients themselves, but rather are influenced and shaped by cultural discourses about their identity and power. It is a short-term therapy with few sessions that are spread over a long period of time. So the historical perspective and development. So narrative therapy or theory was founded in the 1970s and 1980s during social constructionist and secondary cybernetic movement influencing the field of family therapy. The founders are social worker David Epstein and family therapist Michael White. It has been influenced by the work of philosopher Michael Foucault, who drew from the ideas of constructivism. Foucault's work highlights how social powers forged the knowledge that people use to interpret their lives. It gained traction in the U.S. in the 1990s, and narrative therapy practice is in the direction of specific post-structural theories that made the move toward ideas about the self as a relational identity. It is anti-individualist idea that people are multi-storied and multi-sided. And more recently, narrative therapy has been influenced by the work of therapists such as Stephen Megagan, who helped popularize the techniques such as therapeutic letter writing campaigns, and William Madsen, who developed collaborative family therapy. The goal of narrative therapy is to help clients first understand the stories around which they have organized their lives, and then challenge, broaden them, and thus create new realities. Under our narrative approach, clients themselves are not seen as problems, but rather as separate to the problem. This shift in perspective is said to facilitate the opportunity to change. By focusing clients on subtle changes that accompany problem movement and definition, clients are able to address new insights and are able to be creative and clear in addressing their future outcomes. So what are the assumptions and views of narrative therapy? Narrative therapy assumes that many of our patterns of behavior are supported by self-fulfilling prophecies or false beliefs about ourselves that have been shaped by the world around us. The therapist is respectful, non-blaming, views the client as the expert. It's strength-based, it's goal-directed, it's future-focused, and they do not accept resistance. Instead, they look at it as misunderstandings, and they clarify it with the patient and their family. So what are the themes and principles of narrative therapy? They are: reality is socially constructed, which means that our interactions and dialogues with other impacts the way we experience reality. Reality is influenced by and communicated through language, which suggests that people who speak different languages may have radically different interpretations of the same experience. Having a narrative can be understood helps us organize and maintain our reality. In other words, stories and narratives help us to make sense of our experiences. And there is no objective reality or absolute truth. What is true for us may not be the same for another person, or even for ourselves at another point in time. So what are the major concepts of narrative therapy? There is externalization, which in conversation with clients, the problem is externalized or separated from the person, whereby the problem, not the person, is the target of change. There is problem-saturated stories. These are one-dimensional stories clients have about themselves that they have constructed in interaction with others and are influenced by social, cultural forces that have restricted them. These stories are examined in a session as not the only truth, and clients are challenged to expand their views of their self. There's mapping the problem's domain. This affects the problem over time. You're looking at the past, present, and future, and over many domains are examined. In doing so, the client can assess what might be done. There's unique outcomes. These are the timed clients have not been overcome by the problems that may represent new truths and discoveries about themselves that are often strengths or aspects of the client's story that are non-consistent with the problem-saturated or dominant story. And spreading the news. Once the client starts experiencing some positive changes, they're encouraged to let others know about their successes in fighting the effects of the problems or not giving in to the problems. This involves celebrations, certificates, awards, letter writing, or even talking to groups who are facing similar problems. So what is the therapist's role? So in narrative therapy, the therapist takes a not knowing stance. The therapist is not the expert, and the therapist asks questions to elicit client resources. So in doing your assessment, you will be asking lots of questions. So in narrative therapy, there's a dialogue in which both you and the client converse to learn about your story. As you may imagine, it requires many questions on the part of the therapist. The list of questions below is intended to go with the statement of position maps, but these questions can be useful outside of this exercise too. So just a few examples. Here's some questions that can be asked. It sounds as though this problem is part of your life now. How long have you been noticing this problem? What effect does the problem have on your life? And how does the impact on your energy, the problem have on your energy for daily tasks? And etc. So what DSM-5 diagnoses commonly benefit from narrative therapy? Some examples include eating disorders, men and domestic violence, anxiety, depression, grief, PTSD, and it's also beneficial for individuals, couples, and families. So what may be the presenting signs and symptoms that kind of direct you to wanting to take a narrative approach? So this type of therapy works well with people who are very overwhelmed by negative emotions, who have negative thoughts or bad experiences that have kind of like saturated or are causing a huge problem in their life right now. Another is people who consistently view themselves in a negative light as being incompetent or deficient, for example. These are good candidates for this approach, which will help them alter these harmful narratives. So in my case study, I have Mary Ann's story. So Mary Ann's mother was concerned that she had become rebellious and dropped her previous friends to run with an older boyfriend and his crowd who engaged in dangerous and illegal activities and did not attend school. These activities represented a dramatic shift from her previous good behavior. Her mood had changed too, and her grades had dropped dramatically, and she was just caught stealing from a clothing store. So first we need to identify the problem-saturated story. So these are the topics that are included in the problem-saturated story. So she's rebellious, she's not attending school, she's getting an F in math and science, she's doing dangerous and illegal activities, and she's stealing from a clothing store. So how the change occurs. So through externalization and deconstruction, the client is empowered to develop alternative stories that include new options, strategies for living. So what was externalized in Mary Ann's case study? In her case study, it was adolescence. So when discussing with the family, you should introduce the new member, which is adolescence, to the family to make it a positive force instead of a negative one. And this is taking the problem out and externalizing it. As the family developed more empathy about the new person in the family, adolescence, compromises were reached, and they were under to understand that with new independence, it could be earned by following certain rules. And so they taught Mary Ann that with better judgments that she made, that equaled new freedoms, and that's kind of what she was wanting. So with unique outcomes, you're looking at the opposite of the problem, and you're going to identify the truths that Mary Ann has. So some good things that are not in the problem-saturated story is that Mary Ann likes to draw, and she's very good at it. She does help her friends. She likes to ride horses. She takes care of her little sister. She also has a B in English, and then she helps her mother at times. And so this is the new story that we want to focus on and to help her kind of get back to that. So next we need to thicken the alternative story. So her alternative story begins to develop and new ways to deal with the problem are emerged. So now we should have a celebration for Marianne for her new self. You know, things have changed. She may not go back to being exactly the same person she was after the events that had happened, but she's got a new self, and we need to praise the good characteristics that she has. So in her new self, she's described as caring, smart, and helpful. And Marianne talks more to her parents about her new boyfriend now. So here are the stages for your treatment approach, and I'll go through them individually. So stage 1, you want to take apart or deconstruct the problem. Stage 2, you want to map the influence and externalize the conversations. Stage 3, you want to ignite the client and the counselor against the problem. Stage 4, you want to search for an alternative story. Stage 5, you want to construct a history of the preferred story. Stage 6, you want to beginning of self-redefinition. And stage 7, you want to create an audience for that new self. So what is the termination criteria? So when the patient no longer is having the problem anymore, that would meet criteria for termination. If the client has reauthored a preferred story, when the client has accessed resources allowing him to reinforce his new story, those are all termination criteria. So here are some exercises that I found that you can use in practice to help them with their narrative. There's one that identifies values. There's one that is writing their life story, mentioning all the major events that took place in the past and influencing your present. And then identify your skills and abilities that you can use to resolve these conflicts and write down how you confront your problems to get rid of them. Here is a video clip that does a great job at showing the different approaches in narrative therapy. So if you want to look at it, go ahead. All right, so some recent research that I found on narrative therapy that's kind of evidence-based is that one study found that adults with depression and anxiety who were treated with narrative therapy experienced improvements in self-reported quality of life and decreased symptoms of anxiety and depression. That was Shakiri et al. 2020. Another study found that narrative therapy was effective at helping children improve empathy, decision-making, and social skills. And that's with Budin, Morsch, and Avear 2016. And the third study I found showed that married women who experienced increased levels of marital satisfaction after being treated, showed increased levels of marital satisfaction after being treated with narrative therapy. So here are some resources for certification. This particular website, thelynncentury.com, you have 30 hours a thorough examination of narrative practices presented in a clear, usual way. It's held over 4 consecutive weeks from 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. and it's also held virtually. You can get some CME hours from the knowledgetree.org website. There's 5 CME hours available, and then a professional organization, narrativetherapyinitiative.org. You can apply to be have a membership for that, and that's about $50 for a year. Here are some other resources and websites that can be used in practice. Here's a small study guide that I made for narrative therapy. If you want the study guide, just message me and I'll send it to you in a Word document. So in conclusion, through this PowerPoint, you have learned the definition, the historical perspective and development of narrative therapy, the aim, assumptions, themes, and major concepts for narrative therapy, the therapist's roles, assessment, presenting signs and symptoms, and DSM-5 diagnoses that commonly benefit from narrative therapy. You should be able to apply a case study to narrative therapy, and you should be able to identify treatment approaches, exercises, videos, certification, and resources for narrative therapy for practice. And then there's also a study guide for the psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner exam. Here are my resources. This is my second page of resources, and y'all have a great day.